Now, the original trilogy has been released in many different formats, from VHS to DVD and now eventually Blu-ray. We're just going to be taking a look at some of the ones that I currently own, and so on and so forth. Now, to make this video a bit more Star Wars-y, let's add a few more prop elements into here. Now, the first thing we're going to be looking at is the 1995 VHS release of the Star Wars original trilogy, containing Star Wars A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. For those of you who are not born before 2002, this is a VHS tape. The 1995 VHS tapes are currently, in many ways, still the highest quality releases of the original trilogy that have been officially released. Technically, the 2005 Gout DVDs are the highest quality versions. However, these, in my opinion, are a little more high quality. As you can see, this is the actual original box set with the quote here by George Lucas, saying, quote, "The appeal of Star Wars has gone beyond anything I could have ever imagined. I am pleased that for the final video release of Star Wars in its original version, we can present it with the best sound and picture quality yet available, thanks to THX digital mastering. In the years to come, I hope your children and your children's children will enjoy not only this trilogy, but also the adventures yet to come in the continually unfolding Star Wars universe, George Lucas." Like I said, in this collection you receive Star Wars A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, all of which are practically in mint condition. These are incredibly rare to find in some cases, and it's, again, still the highest quality that the original trilogy has been released officially. Now, of course, after the 1995 releases of these VHS tapes in 1997, we got the theatrically released special editions, which also had their own VHS release. However, I do not currently own those versions. Fast forward to 2004, with the 2004 DVD Special Edition release, which, including upon the many alterations for the 1997 theatrical release, they updated a lot of the visual effects, they updated the sound design, and so on and so forth. It had a much higher quality picture, and just overall was a much better presentation compared to the 1997 VHS release. In here, of course, we also have the properly titled versions of the films, Star Wars A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and, of course, Return of the Jedi. With this, they were also given slightly updated front cover designs that were Struzan-esque, but were basically just early Photoshop. I have a lot of nostalgia for these specific versions of the film, as these were the main versions of the films that I had watched for a majority of the time when I was growing up in the early 2000s. Now, from 2004, we now move on to 2011. Technically 2015 if you really want to get into the hassle of the packaging and the way that it's presented. However, these are the 2011 Blu-ray releases of the special editions that were heavily altered by George Lucas and just were massively overhauled for that release. Better sound design, better picture quality, but heavily altered with many of the changes that have been pretty pronounced within the special edition. However, in the 2011 one, they also added a few more things. For example, in Star Wars Episode 6, we had Vader saying no when he threw the Palpatine over that shaft, and then also in Episode 4, he added a rock in front of R2-D2. Beautiful picture quality, however, it is still not the original theatrical versions that we have come to know. Or at least the ones that I have come to know from the original 1995 VHS release. And now moving on from the 2011, we have the most recent version that has been added to my collection, Harmy's Despecialized Editions. Now, for those of you who don't know what these are the theatrically released versions of the original trilogy that were made by an OriginalTrilogy.com member known as Harmy. Along with the help of many people who helped create these Blu-rays and helped put them together, there is an incredible documentary about the whole process of making these down in the description. And these are full theatrical versions of the original trilogy on Blu-ray in HD. These are incredibly clear, they are beautiful to look at, and it's an incredible way of preserving Star Wars that has just inspired people throughout the ages. When my dad was 16, he went out and saw saw the original Star Wars when it came out originally back in 1977. So when he saw this in its original theatrical form, he became incredibly nostalgic, remembering all the little details and some of the original effects that were used in the film. Needless to say, Star Wars has been a big influential part of my life, and since I have all the films out here now, I want to go through each one of them and rank them from my least favorite to my favorite. Starting off with Attack of the Clones. To give a little backstory and history as to how I originally saw this film back in 2002, let's give a little summary of what happened. It's May of 2002, I'm 4 years old, and my dad and I are getting hyped for the new Star Wars movie. So my dad pulls out the VHS tapes of the original 1995 theatrical releases of the films, and we watch each one of them starting with episode 4 and onward. And then right before we went to the theater, we also watched the VHS tape of Star Wars Episode 1, to which then I saw Attack of the Clones. Now as a kid, I obviously loved this movie, but as an adult, it has gotten severely boring. The love story, while not the worst that I have seen in a movie, is just incredibly boring. Lucas cannot write love dialogue to save his own life. There are many pacing issues throughout the film that really bog it down. A lot of the CGI just currently does not hold up to today's standards. There are a few things that I do really like about it. The Battle of Geonosis is pretty cool. Ewan McGregor shines as Obi-Wan in this movie, and the cinematography for the most part actually looks really nice. But of the bunch, this is definitely my least favorite Star Wars film. Now moving on to number 9, Star Wars The Phantom Menace. Now comparatively to some of the other Star Wars films and comparatively to most fans, I don't hate this movie. It's actually really fun. I do like a lot of the action sequences. Specifically, the fight between Darth Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon is my favorite lightsaber duel in the entire series. The overall choreography for the entire scene was just absolutely fantastic, and Ray Park kicks ass as Darth Maul. But the story and a lot of the characters were so boring that when the action sequences actually did come along, I was rejoicing. And as I have grown to be cynical throughout my age, yes, I really did not like Jar Jar Binks. But looking back on the character now, he's not entirely annoying, but there are just many sequences where he just literally adds nothing to the story whatsoever. Moving on to Solo, a Star Wars story. Now, believe it or not, there was a lot of hate for this movie when it initially came out. Naturally, a lot of that hate came from the fact that this was released directly after The Last Jedi, on top of the fact that no one really wanted to see an origin story movie about Han Solo, plus all the production mishaps that might have been happening in between the actual release of the film and so on and so forth. But I honestly really enjoyed this movie. I thought Alden Ehrenreich was really great as Han Solo. Donald Glover absolutely nailed it as Lando Calrissian, and I think Ron Howard's direction of the film was fairly solid. Now, if I wanted to get really nitpicky as far as how this movie looks and all that sort of stuff, the one thing that I will say is, as far as how it looks, I think this is the worst looking Star Wars movie. And that's saying a lot, because Bradford Young is actually one of my favorite working cinematographers right now. However, this just was not his best looking film. There needed to be a much more dynamic range of colors throughout the scenery, and some of them were just a flat washed out pissed yellow, or just a really saturated blue that was just a single tone and not multi-tones throughout the scene. They really needed to bounce around some of the color a bit just to really help accentuate some of the scenery. Moving on now to Rogue One. Now, Rogue One is actually pretty interesting, as it was the first movie that was part of the Star Wars anthology series, or a Star Wars story. Following the people who stole the original Death Star plans, I think Gareth Edwards did a really solid job with this movie. Gareth Edwards is one of my favorite new directors out today, and I really hope he gets more work. This is his third feature film, of which to say I actually have all of Gareth Edwards' movies right here. The cast is really top-notch, and the action sequences are phenomenal. However, while the story overall is really interesting, the characters aren't that interesting. Sure, they look cool, they talk cool. Chirrut Imwe is probably my favorite character in this entire movie, but none of them seem all that interesting, really. The one with the most backstory is Jyn Erso, and I guess second to that might be Cassian, but even so, they're not really all that interesting characters. It's not that they're badly performed, it's just they weren't written that well. I enjoyed this movie a little bit more than Solo, but only by a small margin, because that third act was perfection. And the final scene with Darth Vader, just a cherry on top of the amazing sundae. We now move on to Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi is one of the most perfect endings to a trilogy that most people can get. However, there are some flaws that held it back. I think that was mostly due to George Lucas having much more creative control over this and focusing more on advertising of toys rather than trying to really create a compelling story here. Now, that is to say, I actually don't mind the Ewoks, and I think this is a fantastic movie, but overall, I just think that it's being held back in so many different ways. The story between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader having its conclusion here is just phenomenal. It's one of the best conclusions in any sort of film. We now go up to Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. I know a couple of you are actually going to be out there being like, what? He put Revenge of the Sith over Return of the Jedi? That blasphemer! Blasphemer! But overall, I think this is actually one of the most solid Star Wars films that is out there. And it has such an incredibly heartbreaking ending, considering that this trilogy, for the most part, has been just kind of fluff, a lot of fun. The one thing that mainly puts this above Return of the Jedi for me is nostalgia. I remember in 2005 going to the theater and fully seeing this in the theater. It was fantastic. Being able to see this movie on the big screen at the time was one of the best experiences of my entire life. It had incredible action sequences. It actually had a lot of emotion and a lot of really dark stuff in it, which was surprising considering a Star Wars movie. It has many of its own flaws, but I love it just the same. Moving on to Star Wars Episode 8: The Last Jedi. Get it off screen. Get it off screen. Oh. Okay. I'm gonna bring it back very slowly before people start throwing firebombs at me. I know, incredibly controversial, but I do love The Last Jedi. Now, that is to say, yes, I do have my own problems with this movie. The pacing is off in many sequences. I think the Canto Bight scene goes on for a little too long. But overall, I think it's a really good movie. And for those out there that actually say, oh, there's no flaws with this film whatsoever, I'm sorry, but you have to kind of wipe the rose tinting off the glasses. There are flaws with this movie. None of it really comes from the direction, but from some of the writing. Like I said, the Canto Bight scene, I think could have maybe cut 5 or 10 minutes from it. The pacing from the second act just feels really bogged down. However, for what I love with this movie is the character development, specifically between Rey, Luke, and Kylo. I think what they do with these characters is amazing. Every single scene with them is absolutely phenomenal and really gets us developed into that world. I know people have a lot of problems with Luke as far as a character and some of his choices, but Mark Hamill absolutely steals this movie. This is, in my opinion, his all-time greatest performance. Who knows, maybe his performance in Rise of Skywalker will be even better. I have no idea. But as it stands, Mark Hamill, this is your shining achievement. Daisy Ridley once again shines and does an amazing job as the amazing Rey. Again, I have flaws with this movie as well. I don't think it's as great as some people would lead it up to be, but it's nowhere near terrible as some other people would lead you to believe. Now moving on to Star Wars, or as the current nomenclature of it, Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. But screw that, no, it's just Star Wars. In its original 1977 theatrical release, it was Star Wars. This is the movie that set it all off, winning 5 Academy Awards and winning just multiple awards throughout the industry, changing film for the foreseeable future after that. 42 years later, it's seen as one of the most influential films in all of cinema history. The special effects were groundbreaking, the story was great, the characters were incredibly likable, and the mythology was fascinating, and we wanted to know more about it. Along with some really great performances strewn throughout the film, this is the movie to see. And since I have the Harmony Despecialized editions, I can watch the highest quality form of the theatrical versions yet available. In the number 2 spot, I have Star Wars The Force Awakens. Again, I do acknowledge that this movie does have some pretty blatant flaws, but I can't remember a more fun experience that I had with a Star Wars movie in the theater. The amount of anticipation that I had from 2005 all the way up to 2015 when this released, a 10-year wait for a new Star Wars movie. And for me, it blew all my expectations out of the water. This was a fantastic Star Wars movie. Amazing action sequences, brilliant direction from J.J. Abrams. Overall, I can't remember a more fun experience I had with a Star Wars movie in the theater or since. And finally, my #1 favorite Star Wars film, Empire Strikes Back. I mean, that's pretty much a given. It is a perfect sequel. Amazing chemistry between all of the characters presented, some amazing action sequences, amazing drama, perfect pacing, practically perfect in every way. A lot like Mary Poppins. Cheeky. Not only is it my all-time favorite Star Wars film, but it's also one of my all-time favorite sequels. Easily also just one of my favorite films and easily in the top 20. So yeah, everyone, those were my favorite Star Wars films. Tell me what you guys thought of this sort of new format when considering reviewing some of these films, putting them in top 10 order and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.